Good afternoon and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another analysis and breakdown of the Quran of the Muslims. Yes, we're back once again breaking this thing down verse by verse into factual, logical statements in English so that you and I can understand who or what this Allah Akbar, what does he mean by the contents of his book here? And more importantly for us, how does this affect us in our lives as non-believers in the world today? So, before I start, as I always do, I'm going to tell you now, after replacing the cover, if you have any doubts as to my factual accuracy, please first buy and read one of these, an Arabic-only Quran that looks like this, not an English one, not Quran.com, not the Google Translate novelization, because they are false doctrines, incorrect, and they do not contain the perfectly preserved, accurate word of Allah, like this one does. So use this one to fact-check me, and I hope that you do, because once you have done so, you'll recognise every single word I'm about to tell you now from here is 100% true and accurate of the words of Allah and what Muslims believe today. So, let's get started. The last one we did was the encapsulation, the final verses of Al-NISA, the book of women, children and mothering, in which we found out about the Jihad, Allah's guarded secret. That was an interesting one about how he actually wants to kill all the non-believers, and instrumental in this plan are the indoctrinated children who he's going to send to the far corners of the earth to chop off our heads if we don't obey only Allah. Also, there were some random threats and punishments to motivate this to happen, and finally a little bit of slagging off of the Jews and Christians, the Jews who are deceived by the false Isa, you know, Jesus, son of Allah, the false Jesus, and the Christians because he's terrified of them, and what he most fears in life is his Muslims becoming Christians, because in his own words he says, once you go Christian, you ain't never coming back, and that's a fact. So, with that in mind, let's carry on. Instead of going through more verses, because we finished Al-NIISA now, I thought let's go back through Al-NIISA and revise what we already know, so we can be sure in our heads everything that was in this book in bullet points for our debates, and just so that we know better. So we can take that knowledge forward into our lives, and we can debate and beat every single Muslim, or indeed Catholics who are apologetics of the Muslim faith, as in the pieces that cross over, which are the same in both faiths. And we can preserve and uphold the truth of Christ, and indeed the secular world, for the good of society and the moral good of our lives. Right, let's get started. So, Al-NIISA, the Book of Women and Children, starts off with the first few pages with how to find women for work, rest and play. So what this means is, you think with a book called Women, that's what Al-NIISA means, you think a book about women would actually be describing women's lives in terms of women living them. But that is not what we find in the Quran of the Muslims. What we find is a man's guide from Allah how to find women in order to put them to work as concubines and slavery, wives who are effectively slaves, so that you can make money from them, from the work that they do, be seen to be treating them fairly in the eyes of Allah, i.e. doing what Allah has commanded, not actually treating them fairly. And finally, to have lots and lots of sons. You want your baby production line in full energetic force so you can make lots of babies to swing swords at the Christians and Jews to complete the end times genocidal prophecy, which is the aim of the religion of peace, as we know, and as we keep seeing more and more evidence of as the weeks pass by. So, points to remember are, most of the women described in Al-NIISA are going to be orphan girls you found on the street, previously divorced or thrown out daughters that you didn't have the money to keep in the Muslim faith, or they're going to be prisoners of war from the countries which you invade, or dhimmi, which means willing slaves that you've used their own stupidity and ignorance as a weapon against them, and you convince them that they should be your slave in one capacity or another. So those ones don't recognise themselves as slaves. They think they're just doting friends or girlfriends or whatever, and they think they're doing a good thing for you, O Muslim. But in actual fact, in the eyes of the Muslim, they're just dhimmi slaves. So we're going to use them the same way as our orphans. And what I mean by that is we're going to use them in our right hand, which is described by Allah as a tool or a weapon, which the Muslim man will use to further the causes of Allah, the jihad, and the procurement of money to go back to the mosque for the war chest for the jihad. That's the first point. Point number 2, unwanted daughters, polygamy, and babies. So, what happens when you find these women? Because obviously they're a great burden to you, and they're filthy, indecent and sinful, as we know from Allah's own testimony in the Quran of the Muslims. He absolutely does not like women. The reason they exist is not because they're useful. They don't do anything. The only thing they are useful for, in the words of Allah, is as a plant pot, a non-glorious, filthy, indecent plant pot for you to plough your seed into, and then to grow babies. And if they can't even do that because they're that stupid or simple or evil, you know, i.e. they're prisoners of war or they're slaves you took from elsewhere, then you are to share them in the community for your brothers to use as concubines. So what that means is you become the pimp, and you can have as many, you can have unlimited concubines. You know, you can have 4 Muslim wives, 4 wives from your concubines and a favourite, and then you can have unlimited concubines. So that means the life of a Muslim in the Arabic Quran is beset by the problems of women, and that's why you have to hold them very firmly in your right hand, and you have to control them through violence, brainwashing, and fear. So there is a level of punishment you apply to them, and the reasons you apply this punishment to them is A, they are not obeying Allah, i.e. they are not willingly being pregnant the entire time, producing you lots of sons. B, they are not doing exactly what you tell them to do, because Allah gives you as the man a degree of power over them. And what this means is everything that they think they have as rights, you can cancel those rights at any time. You have the rights over them as they are your property, O Muslim man. And the third reason is obviously making money in the community. So even though you're their pimp, they cannot say no. If you ask them to sleep with someone for money, or a group of men, you cannot say no, or there's a big dishonour for you, and you will get beaten, you will be admonished, you will be sleeping on the floor outside, you will be locked in a house and starved, possibly to death, and if anything happens to you, i.e. you are gang raped or you are beaten up by your clients, you have to find twice in weight of men to be your witnesses. So let's say you're in a room, you're servicing 4 guys at once, and they all decide to rape you and not pay you. You take this complaint back to your pimp, the Muslim man. You have to find 8 Muslims who witness this, or 16 women, because a woman is worth less than half of a man, to make the accusation. You have to have pre-found 8 men or 16 women who saw this and will testify in order to make that accusation. Otherwise, you are the one who is responsible. You'll be punished for this. And if this happens twice, you have to take yourself out the back and commit suicide in the proper and correct way. Again, in the words of Allah, most merciful, most graceful, who really does not like the women. So, putting all that together, you start to build up the picture of Al-Nisa, women in the eyes of the Muslim faith, and indeed the Muslim man. And this explains a lot of the behaviour we see on the streets in the West, with concern to how Muslims are treating our daughters, our wives, our friends, our women. Not in a good way whatsoever. Allah also describes how you are allowed to lie to your wives and your concubines, in fact your daughters as well. You can tell them any amount of lies you want. Allah gives you the degree of power in which to do that, and actually describes if you have different wives in different countries and you think they're going to become rebellious or disobedient because they know about your other wives, you are encouraged to lie to them and tell them, you're the only one for me, my love. I don't have any other wives, when you've got like 7 other wives. Allah actually says that's a good thing to do, and he says if you don't do it, anything that happens to you is your own fault, because you weren't obediently worshipping Allah. You weren't doing what he instructed you to do, therefore you weren't treating the women fairly. You know, you weren't lying to them properly, O Muslim man. That's the reason they've left you. But you still got to pay me, says Allah, at the mosque. So that's point 1. Point 2. Forbidden vaginas, filthy, sinful and indecent women. So this is the section that goes into detail about more of the punishments that we have just gone through in section 1, but also the apportioning of the inheritance. So when you kill a woman, when you're punishing her, let's say you beat her to death, she dies as a concubine, or you lock her in a house and she starves, she might have children by you, or you might have children by her, and then you have to take the money off her body and spread it about fairly. So that's what this part describes. It also describes fathers, wives, and other women you can't sleep with or marry, despite the fact that you're allowed to take in your right hand any woman, and they're not allowed to say no to you. The aspects and the concept of consent, it doesn't exist within Islam at all. Even though they claim it does, and they will quote you exterior pieces of Quran and Hadiths to say, look, it suggests that there's consent here. I can tell you, those pieces are added in English or romanticized in Arabic, because in the Quran of the Muslims, this book here, Allah describes that there is no consent, and he says there's no age of consent either. So it's a free-for-all. As soon as you see a hair or a woman bleeding, that's her ready to go for sex and marriage and being a concubine. And it doesn't matter if you have any evidence of this, because you are checking every day. You're lifting up the skirts of your 2, 3 and 4-year-olds to check for hair and blood. And if you spot any, that's her ready to go. So even if you were the cause of that blood appearing, or there was like one single hair that's now plucked and it's not there, that still counts. And what that means is the Muslim man decides which one of these women is ready for service and what age she is in at that point. Which means you don't have an age of consent. You don't have consent. You have no rights over your own body or your own fate, O women, says Allah in the book. And as we know, if you don't do this, A, you're not treating them fairly. B, you're not obeying Allah. C, you are a bad Muslim who is closer to an infidel. You know, like one of those sneaky Jews or those rabble shepherd Christians. That's the kind of guy who does that, you know, considering the women. Muhammad even says in the hadith, don't treat your women nicely, don't give them reason to rebel and feel seditious, don't give them any reason to feel powerful in their own life, beat them down, instruct them in the ways of Allah, order them around, you know, do something nice once in a while, you know, throw them a box of chocolates once a year, tell them that they are a good mother or something, but the rest of the time, you make them know they are there to produce sons and to spend the money on the things you tell them to do. Now, that brings us to the last point of point 2. The wives of your slaves are just as much in your right hand as the wives in your right hand. And what that means is, if you can't find enough wives to give you sons, if your actual wives aren't giving you sons, you can swap them out for the wives of your slaves. What that means is, the slaves that you take are married, and if you need one of their wives to take as your own, their marriage is null and void in the eyes of Allah. It means you can take them and marry them as your own. Even though he said earlier, marrying someone prevents this, you know, you shouldn't have sex with the wife of another. Now he's changing his story and he's saying actually if you need to, you can. And that's what we find in point 2. Allah is very good at saying definitely don't do this and then spending the rest of the chapter going unless this. So he gives the Muslims the ideal and he gives them the discussion point to bring up in debate saying Allah says don't do this, but then he also gives them like 12 reasons to do this, accept this, in this case you can do it, under this case you can do it. And that's what we find the whole Quran like. He sets up 2 opposing wills and says follow them both, i.e. don't kill each other Muslims, don't kill anyone else Muslims, but actually in these scenarios you have to. Don't be horrible to women Muslims, don't rape women Muslims, but actually in these scenarios you have to. Don't brainwash your kids Muslims, give your kids nice treatment Muslims, but under these exceptions actually don't, you have to be horrible and brainwash them. And this is what we find throughout Al-NIISA as well. So, that's the end of point 2. Point 3. Muslims fornicating and then cleansing from the filth. This is a great one to remember for your debates, right? In Al-NIISA, Allah at the very beginning of the chapter regarding the fornication says, fornication's bad. Don't ever fornicate. If you fornicate, you will be straying far from Allah. That's what he says at the beginning. But then he says, accept to reduce your burdens. Now, he doesn't explain what burdens are. He doesn't define burdens. Neither does he describe ways to reduce your burdens, except by saying, and I quote, this is a quote from Allah speaking to his Muslims. Allah created men greedy and weak, and he created women as a huge burden for them. And they're going to have lots of these women. Women are in abundance. There's virtually millions of them everywhere because you keep taking more of them, having slaves and concubine wives. So, because you are weak and greedy, O Muslim, and because the women are a great burden to you, you can already exchange your wives out for sex slaves anytime you want, and then the wife loses her rights as a wife. She gets no money. She's not allowed to live in your house. She's then owned by the mosque, who will pay to feed her as long as she's a concubine, and she has even less rights. But also, the exceptions to you being nice to these women to release yourself of their burdens include cheating on your wife, having sex with other people outside of marriage, and it even extends to young boys, which they are described as the weakling boys, who don't worship Allah enough and follow the Quran enough. The ones who have doubts, hesitations, or are worshipping other people, or who are not obediently worshipping Allah 100% of the time. So as you can imagine, this is mostly going to be teenagers and prepubescent children. They're the ones who haven't learnt yet that they should worship Allah 100%. And they have doubts or questions, and they bring these doubts or questions to their brothers, their aunts, their uncles, or their fathers. And it becomes known in the community, these are weaklings. This puts them directly in danger of being whisked off the street and then molested. But it's not described as being molested, and in fact we know. Allah has said it's his glad tidings that you take these boys instead of your brothers' wives. Even though your brothers' wives are okay under certain circumstances. And in fact it says, fathers' wives and sisters, unless he permits you, sons, you cannot have sex with them. So what he's saying there is, the concept of not having sex with your stepmother or your stepmother's sisters goes out the window if your father permits you to do that. So what that means is, if your father gets annoyed with your stepmother, one of your wives who is not your direct mother, and he wants you to rape her, he can command that you do that, and it's legal. It's absolutely legal. And we know from our reading of this book, not only is it legal, it's actually encouraged. Now, it's not in this one, the English translation. This one, it kind of is mentioned in there, but they skirt around it, and rather than using the actual sexual violence, they just say admonish, guilt trip, things like this. They really pretty and sweeten it up so that we can argue it. But remember what I said. This is the infidel one. This is Quran of the infidels. We do not refer to this because Allah only speaks in Arabic, not English, like this. And this Arabic here is the novelization. The Arabic in this one is nothing like the Arabic in this one. And this is the mosque one. This is the one they read in the mosque. So we stick to this. And if we do that, we know every single word of this, however shocking it may sound to you, however unbelievably disgusting and depraved, this is Islam. That's what that means, point number 3. And we move on to point number 4. Don't kill other Muslims over women. There's plenty to go round. So, following on from the don't fornicate except, don't beat your women and kill them except, don't take like 1,000,000 concubines as your wives except, we get more of the same in point 4. So, don't kill other Muslims over women because there's plenty. And he starts off by saying, Allah's bounty includes a multitude of women for you. Wives, non-Muslim wives, sex slaves, non-Muslim sex slaves, prisoners of war, orphans you find on the street, random people's daughters that you just found, that you just put in a van and drove away and made your slaves. But no hoarding. So what that means is, if you have so many that you're starting to lose money because that you don't have enough time in the day to pimp all these women out, it's going to put a burden of finance on you, which means you don't have enough money to pay the mosque. And that's not good. Because each one of these women you own, the mosque expects that you're going to pay a usury. They don't call it usury, they call it a tariff or something else. But you have to pay charities, it's called zakat, to the mosque. And each one of these women you have in your household increases the amount of zakat that you will owe. So, if you're not farming them out as pimps, if they're not producing you babies to make money, or you're not selling them to the Jihad, they're a liability, they're not an asset, they're costing you money. And that's the reason Allah says don't get greedy and hoard the ones you're not using. Spread them about the community. Give them away as brides to your brothers, uncles, aunts and the community, or sell them as slaves elsewhere. Also, he describes in his own words a traffic and trade of these women. You should freely traffic and trade these women, which is a sex trade. That is in the Quran. A sex trade. Think about that. This is a religion that has, and I quote, traffic and trade of spare women. That is Allah telling Muslims to do that, and if they don't, it's a crime. Remember that. If they don't obey Allah, that is a crime. So if they don't traffic and trade their spare women and hoard the women to do the traffic and trade with, it's actually a crime to not do it. And we know the reason they're doing this is because they have appointed sharers, i.e. they are all going to shag a concubine together, and then they're going to decide, oh, this is a good one to share, so we're going to make her a concubine. This one's my favourite. She's going to be your wife tomorrow. We're going to swap your wife out for this one, and your wife's now going to be a concubine. And the reason they are doing the traffic and trading and having all these wives is, once again, the causes of Allah. The holy jihad in service of the end times genocidal prophecy, killing all the kafiri, the non-believers of the world, to reduce the world to nothing, and then have Islam dominate all countries and destroy all other faiths, and to bring all the money back to the mosques in Mecca, or I suppose if you're not a Sunni, it would be the one in Iran, the main two Islamic authorities in the world. And isn't it just weird how these countries, Iran, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Palestine, are always a problem for the West, even though they deny it, even though they propagandize their own people to think we're the ones starting wars constantly on them, we're the one killing all the babies. When we look at what they're actually doing and we ignore their false words, we can see with our own eyes. These guys are not only murdering and raping us and their own people and their own neighbouring countries, they're doing it because Allah has expressly commanded them to a jihad, and that is the reason why they say it's a self-defense. Because by way of us not obeying Allah via this, we are at war with them. That's how it's described in Al-NIISA. If someone doesn't 100% surrender to Islam, they are at war with Allah, and that means they're a sworn enemy of you, O Muslim. And if you don't like it, you have any doubts or hesitations, off with your head, you're dead, you're not getting your virgins, and you'll burn forever in hell. Other Muslims will hate you. Which is why they have this. Don't kill other Muslims over women. You'll have plenty. We'll keep doing the conquest. You'll have women in other countries. You'll be sending some abroad. Some will be coming back here. You'll have concubines, sex slave wives, proper wives, and you'll have daughters. And if you have too many daughters and you cannot afford to pay for them, you sell them from your right hand to the right hand of another man, and they become concubines or slaves of the other man. And that's in the Quran. That's Sharia. That's their law. If you don't do it, you're a criminal. So we move to point number 5. Men take ownership of women in full. And this is considered to be Allah's glad tidings upon the men. So the women aren't even considered. We notice in the book of women, we haven't once mentioned how the woman's going to feel about anything. There's no women's rights. There's no how the woman's going to feel. There's no consent. There's no consideration at all of what the woman wants in her own life. She has no control over this and isn't even allowed to disagree or have disbelief or questions. Otherwise, admonish, beat, rape, starve, death. And that's in the law. So, men take ownership of women 100%. We know that they're plant pots. That's described in the Quran. They actually are called plant pots and therefore receiving of the man's seed to grow babies for the jihad. We know about the traffic and trade of selling and buying sex slaves from other countries but also from their own countries in order to make money to pay for the jihad and to grow the mosques. But what is also added at this point in the book is the appointment of inheritance. So we know people can have the inheritance taken off them while they are still breathing. Even though this isn't in the English Quran, this is in the Arabic Quran. And what that means is, if you start to say your woman is retarded, she loses rights to everything she owns, even the portion that you're paying her back. Because remember, you have to pay her more than nothing to be treating her fairly. So say she makes £1,000 a day for you, you can give her like 50 quid. If you then start saying she's retarded, no, that 50 quid now belongs to you and she belongs to you fully. She doesn't even get 50 quid. So that's what's described in part 5. We know that the plant pots, the punishing and the guarding of Allah's secret, which is the growth of the jihad and the teaching of the children, this doctrine, is the most important thing in the faith. But we learn also that keeping Muslims in abject poverty is another driving factor why they are going to have no argument with this. So if you think about it, there's no jobs for them, there's no career for them, they're not allowed to own businesses outside of the imams for the mosque. Only the mosque is allowed to own things. It's like communism. And if you are seen to be building wealth, owning businesses or doing things outside of Islam, other Muslims will come and punish and kill you because it's the law that they do this. And you will be seen as a criminal when they take your head, beat you, or, you know, they destroy your things and rob you. You will be back to square one, doing the same things you were doing. You would have lost all your hard-earned gains. Not only that, you'll be hated from that point forward, and they will punish you. How do we know this? Because Allah decrees it in His grace and mercy and wisdom. And if you don't do it, you know what you're going to get. Off the head, you're dead. And remember, He sees and knows all things. He even knows your thoughts. He says He can see your thoughts before you think them. He says He wrote every man's path. Even though He disproves this at various points in the book. That's what Muslims believe. If they look this way, they see Allah. If they look this way, they see Allah. If they turn the light off, Allah's there. If they turn the light on, Allah is here. Allah, 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 Allah. That's what this book is. It's mind control, brainwashing from a young age through the mother, through the father, through the imam, through Allah and the mosque, with the intent of crushing the human spirit out of every single Muslim to make sure they know. Your life is about two things. Jihad, killing the foreigners and dying, bringing the money back to Allah at the mosque. And so we move on. Oh yeah, and I forgot. Another thing about women that you must know, even the highest, most prized Muslim wives are treated in this way. So they will deny this when they're out in the community. For the preservation of their own Islamic obedience, they have to praise up their religion and cover the sins of their brothers, and that includes their husbands. So if you ask a Muslim woman, are you getting beaten up? Is your husband treating you horribly and stealing all your money from the job you're going to? She will say, no, he's lovely. He lets me do anything I want. But when she goes home, she's wife number 6. She has no money. She gives all her money to him. And she's not allowed to be honest, despite the fact that he is lying to her about his other wives. Like, she might not even know about the other wives. And this is done so that you can attest to the obedience of the woman, because Allah says the value of a woman is her obedience, the same as a man. Allah says your value as a Muslim to him is how blind your obedience is and how well you uphold his commands. Even when you don't like them or don't understand them, if you do them, you will be rewarded a great bounty in the hereafter, and you'll get your 72 virgins. You know, he won't punish you and burn you in hell forever. That's how the men see the women. If she does everything she's told and doesn't complain, if she readily forgives all your philanderings, your fornications, you're sleeping with other women, you're sleeping with young boys, you're having secret wives on the side that she's not allowed to ask you about and will be punished for even finding out about. If she's okay with all this, she's obedient. But the main thing is, when you send her off to the market with your money and you say, right, I want these different equipments, these weapon-making, bomb-making kits or whatever the hell it is they buy, if she comes back with exactly the thing you asked for and the right change, then you should reward her with having sex with her because she has been obedient. However, if she comes back with the wrong change, for instance, if she bought herself something or she swapped out one of the brands because it was out of stock, came back with the wrong thing, then you must punish her. And Allah says, if you don't, you are being disobedient, O Muslim. So your wife, through disobeying you, has caused you to fall into disrepute with Allah, and he won't love you anymore. You will be punished, and then you'll have to punish her to get that back and be respectful again. So Allah, from the top, through the imams, through the husband, is enforcing violence and sexual punishments on the wife and therefore the children. And it's all hidden in here in the book of Al-NIISA, women. So scholars who have read this entire book and skipped over Al-NIISA thinking it wasn't going to be important, guys, I will tell you now. Al-NIISA is the most important book in this that we have so far. It has Allah's guarded secret, it has the indoctrination of children, it has controlling and brainwashing wives as your slaves in the cause of the jihad. So if you haven't read Al-NIISA, you are not doing your job correctly. You need to watch the videos. So that's it. That's what that means. So that's the end of point 5. Now the last 2 points are a little bit more involved, so stay with me here. I know we've gone to half an hour already, but it's really important, if we want to understand these people, how they are affecting our culture here, these Muslims, how Islam is affecting our culture and stealthily doing this jihad to destroy our culture, our moral values, which it sees as unrighteous and worthless. We need to understand these last 2 points fully. Okay, so stay with me. Point number 6. Unbelievers, jihadis, and non-Muslim immoral women. So, we know, because we've gone through the first 5 points, the main goal of Islam is to push the jihad agenda for Allah into other countries. It's a conquest. It's not a religion, it's a conquest politic. A dictatorship which wants to go into other countries. It's not interested in its own countries. And we know this because it says in Al-Imran, and actually at the beginning of Al-Nisa, if you don't want to fight the jihad abroad, you're a coward, and you'll be seen as a weakling, and we know what happens to the weaklings. They're treated like the women slaves, which is not going to be good for you, O Muslims. So get your sword, get your passport, go to jihad. But the reason this is relevant now is because this whole book is teaching children about war. Under the guise of education and religion, you know, morality and family life, what we are actually doing with Al-NIISA here, O Muslims, is we are brainwashing and indoctrinating our innocent children from a young age to have the desire to go abroad and kill other people for no more reason than Allah hath commanded it. Allah tells him that foreigners are evil, sneaky, that they are scheming behind closed doors to come and kill you, which is complete nonsense. Nobody's scheming to come and kill Muslims in their own country. And he tells them they are immoral and bad. They are the cause of all sins on the earth. How does he make them believe this? Well, he has the women and the children push false narratives with the fake accusations. And this is another lie Taqiyya, it's called, which you are not only permitted to do in Islam, but you are encouraged strongly to do. If you don't do it, you're not worshipping enough, so Allah will punish you. And that's why we see in Israel, they're constantly getting rocket attacks and personally, assassins sent in to kill people and torture and rape people and take hostages. But then all we see in the Muslim-controlled media is, the Jews are killing babies, the Jews are invading this, that and the other, the Jews are horrible, evil people. When it's actually them doing all that stuff to the Jews. And we know from Allah's end times genocidal prophecy, where he himself in the time of Moses in the Quran describes this, once Israel falls, this is what their plan is, this is the Jihad, once they get rid of Israel, they're going to set up a caliphate in Jerusalem and they are going to spread out. And the next targets are Christians, then Sikhs, Buddhists, agnostics, everybody else. And then the last few people, Allah says, O Muslim, when they run and hide from you, call out to the rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will tell you where they are hiding, so you can cut off their heads, and when the last kafir's head rolls off his body, Allah will appear and create the paradise where you will have your 72 virgins, and you will qualify access to your great bounty, and it shall be increased. That is what you must keep in mind when they are apologising for their faith or making excuses, or they are referring to the English one and saying, no, this isn't what's in there, it's a bad translation, it's out of context, it's this guy's lying, he's a Jew, he's evil. As I always say, if you don't believe me, buy it, translate it, and read it yourself. 100% of what I'm telling you is not only in here, it's far more descriptive and violent than I'm telling it to you. I'm giving you a summary. The details are more sordid, more filthy, more violent, and more disgusting than you can imagine. So I highly recommend translate and read it yourself. Or buy the Usama Dakdok English interpretation, which is called The Generous Quran. And the Dr. Nichols book. I've done an article on it on my website. Go and read that. It has a breakdown of all the best, fully non-biased English translations of the Quran and commentaries, which you must read in order to understand these books, because Muslims are biased. They are going to lead you away from the truth, not towards it. Which is why we're doing this series. So, we reach the final point, number 7. Punishing the weaklings, the infidels, and the filthy women. Now, we touched on this earlier, but I feel like as a final point it's worth going through what the punishments are for women when they don't 100% obey, and why they chose these particular punishments. So, let's say you're a Muslim wife, or indeed a concubine, and you're given a task which is not fair. You don't want to do it. And you quote a piece of the Quran in your defense. Right? That's the only thing you can do. You can quote a piece of Quran to try and influence the man to change his mind and not order you to do that thing. If he doesn't like it, even though you're quoting Quran, he can say you are not right in the mind. He can say you are under satanic influence and therefore your intelligence is lowered. You are now retarded. Because you have become retarded in his eyes and he has a decree of power over you, he can take all your money and belongings off you, even your clothes, throw you out in the street, beat you, severely beat you, lightly at first, but if you still don't agree with his task and you still won't do it, he'll beat you severely. If that doesn't work, he can rape you with his brothers and friends. If that doesn't work, he will lock you in a house alone in the dark with nothing and wait for you to starve to death. That's the law. That is literally, if you don't do that, you're not obeying Allah. That's in the Book of Women. We know this. So, why would he have people forcibly surrendering through violence like this? Well, it's because psychologically it breaks the woman down. After a while she knows, there's no point arguing with this and it's better for me if I don't. And that is what it says in the latter portions of Al-NIISA. It's better for you if you don't. So we know the reason why they are such harsh punishments for women, beating, starving, raping and killing, is because this woman's death doesn't matter. The only matter is that other women can see it happening, and it makes them more obedient in future. They will bow to surrender to the man. If they see this one being beaten, starved, raped and then killed, and then the man being congratulated as a good Muslim and rewarded for this, how do you think the other women in the community feel? They know. Don't talk to Christians or Jews. Preach up the sins of your brothers. Cover the sins of the religion, for God's sake. Just do what you're told. You know, don't die for the sake of nothing. And then be dishonoured in death, because you'll be burning in hell forever. Nobody will come to your aid, says Allah. That's why they do these. But the men don't get this kind of treatment. No, the men, as long as they're obeying, they get rewarded in the afterlife when it's finally created at the end of the Jihad. You know, when all the infidels are killed at the end of the end times genocidal prophecy day. They get rewarded with 72 buxom virgins. And it actually specifies virginal brides. Now, do you think many women are going to be interested in getting 72 virgin brides in heaven or in paradise? Not going to care at all. The women's main reward in life is not being beaten. Is getting to the next day without having been raped or smashed, head smashed in or raped or killed. That's her only reward. She doesn't get anything in the hereafter. She can be reborn as a virgin, which lasts for one day. And then after losing her virginity, she will disappear. That's the reward for women. So we know. Al-NIISA props this up perfectly and explains in detail why this is the case. Islam is not interested in women whatsoever. It does not care about women. Women are there to create babies. Women are there to create wealth. Babies and wealth are there to fight the jihad with, and the jihad is there to kill the non-believers so that everyone can worship only Allah. That is the only thing Allah cares about. He couldn't even care less about his children. And the final point is how Allah intends to spread terror and fear amongst the whole world. As we can see here, his main tool is fear. Terror that he puts into his women, his children, and actually his men, fear of Allah. That's the main tool that he uses, because he can't do anything else. He uses Muslim against Muslim, child against mother, mother against child, mother, husband and child against everyone else in the world, in the jihad. So we know terrorism is this. Let's not mince our words. We know 100% now from reading and studying this book, the Quran is the root of terrorism in the West. Now, I'm not saying all terrorists are Muslim. I'm not saying all Muslims are terrorists. But virtually all terrorism that happens is coming through the reading of the Quran. And it is Muslims who are doing it. Even though they deny it via the taqiyya, it is a jihad which they are committed to. And the reason we know this is thusly. I challenge any Muslim, I've done this before, not one has ever taken me up on this, I challenge every single Muslim on earth, if you disagree with anything that I've said, make a video with your real face in it so we can see it's definitely you, and say, my name, testify that if Allah tells me to go and kill all the non-believers just for the fact that they don't obey him, I will tell him he is wrong. They will not do it because they know, A, they want to kill all non-believers, and B, they don't think he's wrong. And Christians will do this. You will not find a single Christian, or in fact a Jew, who won't do this. I'll do it now. If Jesus Christ ever kills me to go and kill all Muslims for the fact that they don't worship Jesus, I will tell him to get stuffed and I will not be a Christian past that day. But you know what I can tell you? Jesus Christ is peaceful, loving and merciful, the things that Allah claims. He would never tell me to kill an innocent. He would never drive me to murdering people I didn't know for no reason more than they weren't worshipping him. Only Satan does these things, and that is the point I want you to take from this video. Now that we know the ins and outs of Al-NIISA and the first 4.5 books of the Quran of the Muslims, we know the character and nature of Allah. He is not anything like God. God is dear to millions of people because he is just, because he is logical and loving, because he provides, because he has intelligence, he's wise. This guy is just rage, vengeance, spite and hate. He is a racist, genocidal demon who we know as Satan, and we should do everything we can to stop the spread of this cancer in our countries, in our societies, and we should never let this into any part of our life if we have any cares about our own existence whatsoever. And that's the end of this video. So, that's the conclusion of Al-NIISA. We're going to have a few days break now, and that's the end of this reading. So I hope you really enjoyed that and you learned something. God bless you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. So I feel like we have a really good understanding of Allah, of Islam, and of the Muslim mind now. But like I always say, if you don't believe me, buy, translate and read your own Arabic Quran. That's all for Without Lies, Islam Dies. We're going to have a few days off. So God bless you all, have a great evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!